Hi, my name is Yevgen Borodin, and a featured speaker today is Dr. John Sabatini. Join the free online community for this ed webinar. As a member, you'll get all of the resources. View and share your recording. You can take the CE quiz, download the slides and chat log, join discussions, get invitations to the upcoming webinar, and just join the community at edweb.net/literacy. After this session, you should be able to identify, describe, and contrast foundational reading skills, explain the importance of these skills in reading development, and recommend one or more strategies for developing each skill. The sponsor of today's webinar is Capti Voice, an all-in-one literacy and learning platform. Capti Voice is a real game changer when it comes to helping struggling readers. It's a tool to provide equity of access to any reading content for students of all abilities. And I'm very excited to announce our partnership with ETS, Education Testing Service, as well as the availability of their ETS Read Ready assessment in Capti. Read Ready is a diagnostic assessment that helps you find out why your students are struggling to read. So now, Capti will help you assess, improve, and accommodate 6 key reading skills and provide you with a powerful literacy solution for so many students. Please stay tuned until the end of the webinar to see a live demo and learn about an exciting opportunity to apply for a literacy microgrant. This is an easy microgrant that you can apply for if you want to improve literacy and accessibility at your school. I'll share more information and a link to apply for the literacy microgrant at the end of the webinar. Okay, that's enough for me right for now. And this session will be led by Dr. John Sabatini, a distinguished research professor at the University of Memphis. Prior to that, John was a principal research scientist at the R&D division of ETS Education Testing Service. By the way, John was the one who created the Read Ready diagnostic assessment and led his research group at ETS to fully develop, test, and validate the assessment. He has enjoyed a prolific career, received numerous grant awards, and you can always catch him at all of the major reading conferences. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the one, the only, Dr. John Sabatini. Take it away, John.
Thank you for that introduction, Evgen. Sorry, I'm moving this on a little bit. And thank you all for showing up. Thank you for EdWeb for hosting this. I'm going to switch over to our slide program. And with that, I'm going to turn off my video now. But I appreciate seeing all the people logged in. I think we saw a lot of people from all over the United States. I saw people from Tennessee here, Nashville, and Memphis. I saw people from New Jersey, where I came from, just a short time ago. And I saw people from the world a little bit. I think I saw Argentina and South America. So welcome all. Okay, so there's one little variation on the title of the presentation: Using the Science of Reading to Develop Foundational Reading Skills and Comprehension in the 21st Century. Okay, I've been in Memphis now for only 3 or 4 months. But I live only a few miles, actually a few blocks from Beale Street, which is one of the centers in the country for blues music. And I'm a blues fan. B.B. King, a legendary blues artist known for playing the Memphis scene. Buddy Guy from the Chicago area, where I went to school. And I believe he's got a connection back to Philadelphia, but I couldn't find that on Wikipedia. Another big fan. So the reason I'm bringing up the blues is it's an example of learning a complex skill. Now, blues is very distinctive sounding music. You'll know it when you hear it, usually if you're a fan or even if you're a casual listener. Thing is that if you learn to play it, and I've tried to over the years with my guitar, there's a set of chord progressions that are very characteristic of it. There's a blues scales that you can practice so that you sort of know by heart the kinds of notes that are played in blues music. There are things they call hooks. These are like musical ideas that just give a distinctive signature sound either to an artist or to a song. You can just add those in as you're going along to make it sound good. So what's the point of all this? Well, all the things I just described to you are the foundational skills that allow you to actually enjoy playing the blues. Because when you're playing the music, you don't want to be thinking about where to put your fingers or what's the next note or what's on the scale. You want those to be part of the automatic repertoire of things you use when you start playing. So the brain likes to do complex skills, and I think that this talk is really about preparing learners with those kinds of foundational skills so they can enjoy reading, they can be complex readers, they can be good at it. So let me start with a few hooks that are basically going to be ideas that I think you can look at as thematic across this presentation. One, literacy is digital. We need to prepare our children for a digital literacy world. I mean, paper can peacefully coexist. I love reading books, paper books, but our children are going to be digital natives. We're going to be digital immigrants learning it across our lifetimes. We have to embrace that. And the good news is there are a lot of technologies coming that are going to help us with helping children to read. Two, reading is language. Language is reading, like writing, speaking, listening. When you read, language centers are active. We're going to show and talk about that a little bit later. Brains do not respect boundaries. They like to do everything they can all at once. You build functional areas across existing areas. Three, brains are intelligent learning machines. They're good at statistics, even if you aren't. They're good at finding patterns, and they're good at orchestrating really complex performances. But they feed on experience and practice. There's no way to build up these complex computational networks that can do all these complicated things without us paying attention to them, without a lot of experience and practice. Oh, and by the way, when you're doing all this practice, you're not always putting all your attention right on the learning part. You sometimes misdirect it. So for example, if I know how to play scales, I play the music. And then I get better at the scales as I play. So I do a combination of practice and a combination of play. That allows me to build automaticity. Automaticity is defined as basically being able to do two things at once while not thinking about one of them. So part of our goal with foundational skills is to make the brain a self-learning mechanism so that every time it's reading and looking at print or listening, it's learning. Finally, you are architects of learners' cognition. You are laying the foundation for a complex structure, a structure that's going to support their lifetime of learning. You're not trying to teach every single thing, every single brick. You are laying a foundation across years, by the way. So I don't know whether I'm talking to single grade level teachers, but the development of reading happens across, well, at least 12 years. So you have to hand off to the next person and the next person this foundation that's building and building. Okay, so let's get on to I call this the big blue marble view. I like to make sure, in the history of reading instruction in the U.S. at least, they talk about pendulum swings. So they go to foundational or basic skills, and then that's all that's taught. And then there's a shift over to sort of away from that, so a broader picture, and then back. Clearly, we need a balanced amount of instruction. Balanced is even the term they use. But I want to make sure to sort of really emphasize the broader scope of reading, even as we talk about foundational skills. To do that, I'm going to go through a little bit of history. So about 7,000 years ago, we started with our writing systems, but they've changed a lot over the past 7,000 years. I think we enjoyed about 500 years of relative stability and gradual technological change after the printing press. And that resulted in genres we're familiar with, like books and manuals and charts and signs, newspapers, magazines, letters, and comics. Now, I went to school in the 70s, and when I was in school, the technologies we used to write were pen, pencil, regular typewriter, electric typewriters coming into vogue. In the 1980s, a home computer looked sort of like this, and TVs still used tubes. And then technical and social change in literacy accelerated. The devices we're using to write and to read with, the media of communication, interaction, and dissemination. There's been an exponential change in literacy in the 21st century. And I like to show these stats because I think they kind of illustrate exponential growth. Only about 1.1 million websites in 1997. About 121 million 10 years later in 2007, and over 1.2 billion as of 2017. So in the digital age, skilled reading is going to require new skill sets compared to 25, 30 years ago. But if you have that much text out there, that you have that much wading through, that you have to really make sense of, foundational skills are going to be more important than ever. But in the U.S., how are we doing with that? Well, millions of children and adults lack foundational reading skills. We did a reanalysis of the 2005 fourth grade National Assessment of Educational Progress oral reading special study. We found about 17% of students had weak, and when I say insufficient foundational skills, we found another 30% who basically had weak automaticity. They didn't have the sort of self-learning skills and automaticity and unconscious ability to do this. And that interferes with their reading. Is there evidence this persists beyond fourth grade? Well, yes. We conducted a study in an urban school district, and we found some 30% of 5th to 9th graders had basically poor word reading or decoding skills. They fell behind a threshold on one of those instruments that Yevgen was talking about. And then we followed these readers across 3-year longitudinal study. No growth in reading comprehension, no growth in their decoding. If you lack foundational skills and you do not intervene, you drift through school as a non-reader until you drop out or you graduate. Well, does this persist into adulthood? I think you know where the answer is going to be for this. Yes. We did a study, or there was a national study of adult literacy. We looked at fluency, reading aloud among adults, national sample. Those who fell below basic in comprehension, 84% of them were reading less than 90 words per minute. By the way, that's almost the same threshold cut point for the fourth graders where they're falling below basic or in comprehension on the NAEP. 47%, even at the next level up, the basic level, were below 90 words per minute. Basic level's not a great level for an adult. You want to be at intermediate or above. And this included high school graduates, community 2-year and 4-year college participants, and many in the workforce. I'm going to now switch on to a broad construct that we developed out of a project I got to work on for several years. It's called the Reading for Understanding Initiative. It was funded in 2010 by the Institute of Educational Sciences, which is part of the Department of Education. And it had a 5-year mission to accelerate the science of reading by creating a network of researchers from multiple disciplines and regions of the U.S. Over 160, and the world, over 160 researchers participated in this. Like any good 5-year project, it took about 7 years to complete. In fact, there will be a follow-up report by the National Association of Educational Science, National Associate, I think that's the right title, sometime in this summer, so please look for that. So I was fortunate enough to lead the assessment project, and there were 2 teams that worked in elementary years, K through 5. There was a team that worked through the middle grades, 2 teams on the middle to high school level. Our team actually had to work across pre-K through 12. And our goal was to develop a comprehension framework that was both science-driven and sensitive to development across this pre-K through 12 range. So we conducted basic research to connect the reading science to assessment designs and to develop innovative assessments and then evaluate the system. So a different way I describe this is to say, well, we had to address this expanding 21st century reading construct. But in doing so, we wanted to incorporate reading and learning science into the designs, therefore enhancing instructional relevance, and then maintain the feasibility and psychometric quality. So in this talk, I'm focused on those 2 middle pieces. What does the reading and learning science say? How can that be used to enhance instructional relevance? So how did we go about this? Well, of course, we're scientists. We reviewed the literature. We looked at Common Core standards. We looked at the existing large assessment systems. We looked at 21st century skills and whether they were represented. We looked at really these important scientific texts like How People Learn or Knowing What Students Know to really understand the learning process. And collectively, they suggested that what we mean by reading and comprehension has changed a lot and gave us ideas about how we could help children learn across time. So we ended up designing a 5-element piece. And so I want to use this as a way to show you the range of things that we think go into reading, and then we're going to focus in. Okay? So the first one, as you might have guessed, is print. Of course, there's the alphabet and numbers, but if you're looking across the system, you realize they come in fonts, shapes, sizes. Yes, you have to read prose text, but you have to read charts and maps and tables. And now you have to do this while digitally navigating the internet and the World Wide Web and all the arrays they have and all the kinds of screens. So the world of print that you go into reading is quite complex. Yes, there's the visual and typographical elements we're used to. But there's all the text structures that you have to understand and handle because they affect meaning, conventions of document literacy, and all these conventions of navigation, search, and iconography. So these are lifelong learning skills that you're going to have to learn and adapt to across your life because they keep changing. Language. Of course, language has a lot to do with linguistics and different areas of the brain, how we use it and we learn language across our lifetimes. So it's the ability to increase proficiency with language, especially but not exclusively as applied to a world of print. And we're going to look at word level, elements of language, sentence level, and academic language. Well, you put print plus language together, you get something more than the sum of its parts. Just like in a water molecule, you're getting something a little bit special. So print and verbal together is sometimes referred to in reading literature as the simple view. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit more, and this is going to be our foundational reading skills. So we're talking about decoding, word recognition, morphology, reading vocabulary, reading fluency. I'm going to put in academic and language skills in there as well. So you put print and verbal together, you have at least local comprehension, you can do a variety of operations on a text, skim, scan, you can identify pieces of information. But you want to do more with text. You want to bring it off of the page and into your head. So I'm going to pause here. So what you want to do is you want to have a representation of that text in your memory. We're going to call this text and discourse, and it's the ability to form a coherent mental memory model of the text that reflects the most likely intended meaning of that text. Now, this is going to require knowledge of text structures and genres. And I'm showing you some of the different text structures that have been studied and some of the graphic organizers that are used to help students to learn how to organize a mental model around the structure of the text. So you would have these models in your head, you'd see a story, you build a synopsis, cause effect, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about this level. These next two levels I'm going to spend a little time talking about later, but I want to give you the sort of broader overview. So of course, once you get the text off the page into your head, you think about it. So conceptual is all about the knowledge, skills, and strategies that bring you to more complex goals that extend the meaning beyond simple text meaning. Even for young readers, some of your time, this is the part of the sort of play and joy of text, is to understand the ideas, to play with them, to connect them to knowledge, to think about them differently. So from young ages to old, you're still working to help them understand that reading is about thinking about it. And the one that I think is the most different in the 21st century is probably the social learning part. So of course there's perspective taking and taking multiple points of view on text. Again, from the very beginning, you're sort of looking at different ways. And with a web out there where people are basically putting their opinions and ideas pretty much unfiltered out there, you are always looking at information that's basically going through multiple points of view. So we learn together to read, and we learn mediated through the different technologies that we interact with. These are all text environments, literacy environments we're planning to help students get to. So the social level is not only about understanding and modeling the social situations in a text, like in a story or a novel, it's also understanding the social context that helps surround the creation of the text. Why was it written? Why was it written for this audience? And the social interactions or implications for people after reading text. How is this affecting the way people think and the way people reason and how they work with each other? This requires something that's not part of reading normally, but is part of the psychology of an individual, mental representations of other minds, your ability to look at things from different points of view. And it's ever increasingly important in a world where we have multiple texts all the time. Some contradict each other, some have credibility issues, some need to be connected to understand things. So putting that all together, we get these five levels. Thank you to Yevgen and team for a nice graphic to represent these 5 levels. And from here on out, we're going to focus ourselves on what we call the foundations. A little bit more focus onto them, print and language, a little bit into the mental modeling, text and discourse. The way I'd like to organize the rest of the talk is building on this idea that science should be a progression or accumulation of evidence and ideas. I mean, occasionally there's a paradigm shift where major theories or conceptions are overthrown, sort of like Einstein's theory in relation to Newton. But even then, there are parts of the older science that still apply. In that spirit, I'm organizing the rest of the talk around a little bit of older science that I hope you're familiar with. The National Reading Panel report, which came out around the year 2000. That's 20 years ago now. And they organized basically the evidence base for reading into 4 areas. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of these and elaborate a little, bring a little science into it, and see where we've come from then, whether some of these hold up, some of the lessons, or some things need to be elaborated or new. By the way, a quick shout out to all the adult education people out there. That's a major area of my work these days, and I hope many of you tuned in. Most of, as you can see from this slide, all of this work has been adapted so that it works for adult learners as well, and most of what I'm talking about should be adaptable to adult learners. Okay, so we're going to start in the middle. We're going to start with fluency. So, skilled adult reader, college or career ready, high school graduate. Average speaking rate I'm speaking to you at 120 to 180 words per minute. Something like 2 to 3 words per second. So for example, if you were listening to the audio narration of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, 77,000 words in the book, 8.5 hours to listen to the narrated version, about 150 words per minute listening rate. The average silent rate of a skilled reader is 240 to 300 words per minute. That's 4 to 5 words a second. Faster to read silently as a skilled reader than to read orally. I think this actually has some important implications for what we want for our learners. And one of the reasons I asked that question about the transition from oral to silent reading. I think a goal for readers across their development is to read at least 100 to 120 words per minute as an oral reading rate. Really, it should be faster, but I think getting up to that rate is where we start to see a break in the improvement and automaticity and comprehension. So make sure that those foundational skills are building up so that you can read accurately with at least the kind of speed that you would listen at. And silently, it should be getting faster. Why? Well, reading slowly can hurt your comprehension. Your working memory fades really quickly for words. So if you're reading very slowly, one may forget a sentence by the time you get the idea. By the way, it's very important that when you're reading aloud or when you're teaching reading aloud, you also emphasize proper phrasing, intonation, and expression. These really help with the sort of chunking of text, with the understanding, with the building of comprehension and meaning. Okay, let's expand on alphabetics a little bit. So I'm going to talk about eye tracking research, if you're not familiar with this. Now, eyes jump from word to word. They do not skim across the page. 20, 30 years of research has been showing how the eyes move. Basically, they move at every 1.1 word or so, even in a skilled reader. So if you're reading continuous text, you are jumping across the page. And you're skipping only like function words, basically. You sometimes go back, you make regressions to check on something you might have missed, or to connect some piece of information. By and large, it's a fast jumping process. Why? Because you only have about 2 degrees of good acuity in the middle of your visual range when you're reading. So basically, you can take in the letters, from one word at a time or so, one long word. And then in the periphery, you can see sort of the spaces and the gaps and a little bit of information of each word. And then you can use that to program your next jump. But remember, you are jumping at a quarter second per word. So your brain is doing a lot of computation in a very fast time with a lot of words you know and a lot of words you don't know. So let's talk about that a little bit. Phonological recoding. Every time you read a word, language, phonology centers of your brain are activated. It's as if one is listening. So this is a simplified look at the network. My neuroscience friends probably could show you much more sophisticated looks at how this looks in a functional area and how it develops. But basically, one reason you can't read and talk at the same time is you're using the same functional area. By the way, word spellings are also activated whenever you're reading, but it's not necessarily the primary path, even for a skilled reader. You're always going from the visual part of the word through the phonology and inner speech and through to the meaning. So reading is part of language. By the way, as you can see there, the time you actually want to inhibit your phonology is when the word is just so computationally wrong in its pronunciation that you can't help but want to say yatched whenever you see the word. So you almost have to try to suppress and think of the way the whole word sounds. But most reading is not whole word. It's basically through the phonology very quickly being computed. The reading is part of language. Impaired reading is when you're trying to only use the visual word form to get to the meaning, and you're not going through phonology and through inner speech. It's the lead symptom of those who have trouble learning to read automatically and fluently using the phonology system. By the way, just a fun fact, every time one hears a word, the visual spelling is activated a little bit. So basically, you are reading right now a little bit while I'm speaking to you, if you're a skilled reader. So it's not as much as when you're reading, but enough to see it, say, in a brain scan. So, lesson from this. Strong cortical reading network is necessary for fluent reading, oral and silent, learning new vocabulary, comprehension. This is the background to the idea of those foundational skills being built up in a very strong way. This requires fluency of word reading from spelling to sound that recognizes good 5,000 to 10,000 words at less than a quarter per second so that your eyes can keep jumping across the page. It also requires you to be able to recode words you've never seen before and either match them to words you've heard or basically to store a pronunciation until you hear them and know the meaning. And again, skilled readers do this as a matter of course. It's part of that underlying computational network of foundational skills. So let's move on to vocabulary, because that's going to build into our understanding of what we mean about developing automaticity in your alphabetics, your phonology center. So I'm going to talk about 3 different areas here very quickly. So first, vocabulary. Children, of course, enter school with very different. I'm speaking into the phone. I'm sorry if some of you can't hear. I'll try to speak as loudly and clearly as possible. So children enter school with very different levels of language and vocabulary. They come in with different levels of breadth of vocabulary, different levels of depth. So why is this important? Well, suppose you're doing a search on, say, the word Lincoln. You might end up with this Lincoln. You could end up with this one. Or you could end up with Lincoln, Nebraska, and the Cornhuskers. So it's important that you recognize that words have these multiple meanings, and you have to associate them. For example, another example, you could be looking up Chad in Africa, and you could be looking up hanging Chad, or just a guy named Chad. That's the first guy that came up when I hit Chad. This is important in school, though, because you're going to learn the same words in different disciplinary areas. So a prime number is very different than a prime rib. It's very different than the proper name Optimus Prime. The way we understand, the best understanding we have of the organization of vocabulary is a semantic associated network in our heads. So every time you hear a word, it connects to other topic, vocabulary, and other features of it. This actually is showing you a kind of a tool you can use to help students to build topical vocabularies to activate their knowledge and to build it. And do not neglect proper nouns. Proper nouns are basically part of vocabulary. They double the size. Not every word appears in a dictionary. They double the size of your vocabulary. So one thing you could do is have students try to use these associated words to narrow their searches and therefore understand how different words kind of connect to different ideas. So why are proper nouns so important? Well, this is about to appear in about a quarter second a word, the following list. It's easy to pick out the people versus the non-people. Okay, to be fair, it's a quarter word second per word in continuous text. It's much slower to try to read words when you're looking at them in a list or a table. But the idea here was that one letter, one sound makes all the difference in which word is which. So when you're reading, you can't be confusing words. You have to know them quickly, lock in the spelling, the sound, and the meaning together. This is the critical parts of foundational skill building. I hope by now, and I'm sure by now, a lot of you, if I'd asked a poll question, use morphology. So teach a child the word fish, and they'll know the word fish. If you teach morphology, they know a school of fishes. So they know inflectional, derivational, and metaphoric uses. This allows you to expand vocabulary and reading, to use it in different contexts, to understand things different. I'm going to spend just a quick amount of time on the comprehension strategies part. And I want to highlight the difference between academic and conversational language. Now, children arrive at school with very different language experiences from home and community. Dialect, accent, it could be non-native speakers of English. But the language of school is academic language. It's the way most teachers speak to their students. It's how books are written. How I'm speaking to you now. If you can hear me, and I apologize for the problems you're having with the audio. The language of school is not transparent to diverse learners. So, for example, here's a children's book written a long time ago. A king, my little readers will say. No, children, you are mistaken. Once upon a time, there was a piece of wood. It was not an expensive piece of wood. Far from it. Just a common block of firewood, one of those thick, solid logs that are put on the fire. That last sentence is 27 words long. It does not sound like conversational speech. It has a number of co-references in it. This is the language of books and reading. More modern example. This is the beginning of Harry Potter. So that last sentence is 23 words long. It makes a reference back to the first sentence. It has discourse connectors in it. It uses some literary language, didn't hold with such nonsense. So my quick teaching part here is about the discourse connectors, really critical for building up understanding across informational texts, arguments, explanations. Not obvious how these words function to many learners coming into the school setting. There's a lot of good programs out there for connecting these to understanding text structures and learning with them. It's really, if you're not using them, please think about it and look them up. So, all right, this is the closing part of the talk. And it's a little bit of the strange part for me, because it's where I tell an invisible, diverse set of educators out there, likely with years of experience in classrooms working with children, with hundreds of books written by teacher educators and my professional colleagues that give tips on teaching. And I'm supposed to provide as a researcher some of those tips. And that's not my calling as a researcher. I find out what works, I understand the science, and then that's translated onto teaching and education by you professionals. But as I said at the outset, I'm hoping this is really about giving you renewed confidence that the science backs up a lot of the practices that you're already doing in classrooms. So there's a flood of new ed technologies coming out, and they're going to facilitate your practice if you know how to distinguish what's good from what's, just a fad, and how it fits into a sensible architecture of instruction. So that's what I want you to think of. You are architects of cognition. You need a game plan or a blueprint to sort of see through a complexity of an overcrowded marketplace of ideas and products. These are going to help you to help your readers become lifetime learners with strong foundational skills. But let's get started with the obvious. I mean, you should have picked this up from the way I was speaking. Yes, alphabetics. But remember, you're not only teaching skills that may or may not be drawn, you're teaching the playing with language. You want to bring joy to this. You're taking it apart and putting it back together. You're blending, deleting, rhyming. You're breaking the secret code. As soon as the children are able, they should be reading aloud, together, chorally, to each other, to you to them. Have them reread text until they do so with ease, speed, and expression, like actors running lines. Or they can read to Siri or Alexa in the tablet, or the tablet or computer can read to them, sort of like the software that Yevgen can show you for Capti. Text-to-speech is getting better and better, and as you'll learn, it sort of can be a very useful tool, especially for students who start to fall behind in their foundational skills and therefore are frustrated by the printed word. And if the synthetic text rendering is not perfect, well, that's a learning and teachable moment. How empowering for a child to correct the computer, to learn that the humans are the masters of language, not the machines. Now, if you're worried that children are going to become word callers, then act out the text. It's natural for humans to impose prosody, intonation, and expression on language. And that leaves the brain some time alone to practice the decoding, the recoding, the automatized word recognition. That computational network needs to create and recognize tens of thousands, often multisyllabic words in a quarter second each. Very important. If your students are older, you need to assess their foundational skills over and over anyway. Decoding, word reading, vocabulary, text fluency. Make sure they're developing properly. If they cannot read when aloud, then they likely are challenged when they're reading silently. You just can't see it. So start with listening to them, reading familiar words, novel words, maybe proper nouns. They also need to transition and perform these when they're reading silently. So you need to assess that as well. There are plenty of tools for that, including my own battery that you'll hear about that can look at different components of reading and their development. Whatever you use, never let on ensuring that they become fluent in these foundations, whatever years it takes, because the consequences are dire. I haven't talked a lot about motivation, but it's really key that you keep engaging, motivating, keep text in their face. The brain needs the text to learn the computation. So, again, whether it's printed in front of them, reading aloud, being read to them, the underlying message, Play with the text, learn text, read all you can. Spelling is actually a good tool. You can let them use the digital devices to find words and help them spell. You can talk about the history of the spelling system and how monks in the 16th century messed up a little bit. You can talk about borrowed words and how they have weird pronunciations like lasagna, cacciatore. Whatever it is, work at their getting used to words in print so that they can read them quickly and distinguish different words. Of course, I've talked about vocabulary. In the end, you really need to be able to see multisyllabic words as basically 3 or 4 quick chunks. You need to understand that words may have different meanings than you expect and then associate them to the right ones. You have to understand the associations and structures of topical vocabularies. Finally, academic language is the currency of education, and school is the place for immersion. It's not natural to out of school. It's very natural in. Model it, text it, email it, write it. Build up their understanding of an academic language discourse. And the way to do that, and the way to do all of this as a foundational skill, is talk, discuss, debate, explain. Play with that language, produce it in classrooms, have them build it, have them share it with each other. So I just closed by re-showing some of the books that I put in the beginning. I see by my clock here that I'm just about at 40 minutes. So I'm going to just put these up here as a quick reminder of some of the themes I think that both the science and just common sense are telling us about reading development in the 21st century. And my last note is to come back to the blues. Buddy Guy and B.B. King used to play together. They did a complex skill. They learned with joy. They learned to be experts in the foundations that helped them to bring this music to us. And I hope that's a good metaphor for thinking about how you can provide the kind of support to children in learning that are going to help them to be lifelong readers and learners. So, thank you.
Okay, let's give it a few questions, and then we will break for a demo, and then we'll come back to questions if you have more. So, John, this is the first question. How do you feel the Common Core standards have affected the pace of reading instruction? Do you agree that it is creating developmentally inappropriate expectations?
Wow, that's a charged and interesting question. I've tended to think that the developers of the Common Core had good intentions and did apply a fair amount of what they were learning and we were learning from the science. I think the pressure to put it in this rigorous sort of time-based sequence and structure may cause some of the problems that the question is implying. It makes it seem as if everybody's going to learn on the same time schedule and path. I don't think it's as sensitive to individual differences in development, and therefore it might put pressure on educators and teachers to rush things along when they really should be spending a little bit more time allowing things to develop. So in that regard, I think it's mixed. And then, of course, there's all the various issues of how it's interpreted in different places. So, but as I look very close, one thing that we write about in a couple of our papers is that after 5th grade, I think it is, there's almost no mention anymore of foundational skills. Now, they may sort of indicate that you should be have assessed and made sure they're okay before you move on. But the fact is, they just no longer talk about it. And again, all the evidence we have is they are not mastered by a lot of students. But now there's middle grade teachers who don't teach reading, and now there's students with a lot of demands and multiple subjects to read a lot of content who really don't have the fluency to do so. So if there's any important lesson out of the whole, session, it's that you just can't do that to learners. You need to make sure you keep with them. I don't care how many years it takes to build up that fluency, because if there's too much effort, they're not going to want to read, and they're not going to read. If you can ease that burden through the development of these kinds of foundational skills, every time they read, they're going to be learning a little bit more word recognition, a little bit more decoding, becomes implicit. So, long answer, that's what I think about that.
Okay, well, I'm going to hold the rest of the questions until after the demo, and we'll come back to questions, and we'll stay as long as you want to keep asking them. Right, so just to follow up on what John was saying, teachers often ask me if it is enough to assess just the grade level or Lexile level. After all, grade levels, these are common metrics, and you can definitely assess general reading comprehension for screening purposes. However, it's not that fast to evaluate, and students may completely bomb on reading comprehension, making the results useless. And it's definitely not enough for instruction, since you can't really teach to reading comprehension. So measuring the reading level is like measuring your body temperature. That's how I think about it. When you already know you have a fever, you already know it. What you really need is the panel of tests to see what's actually causing the fever, and it's much more productive to screen the foundational reading skills to see where the real problem is. And this is why John at ETS and his team developed the Read Ready assessment, which works for students 3 through 12 and adults. It can be completed in 40 to 80 minutes, has 3 difficulty levels, adapts from test to test. It's normed across grades and levels, and it's based on 15 years of research. Everybody says their assessment is most researched. I believe this one is. And here are the 5 foundational skills that are being assessed by Read Ready: word recognition and decoding, vocabulary, morphology, sentence processing, reading efficiency, and reading comprehension. So each skill builds upon the other, with reading comprehension being the sum of all the foundational skills. And you don't have to do all 6 of them. It doesn't have to take 40 to 80 minutes, because you may discover the problem way before you get to the reading comprehension. So why don't I show it real quick? I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I assume you can see it. So this is within Capti. You have different type of assignments that you can assign. One of them is Read Ready. You can create a new assignment, give it a name, select the grade, the difficulty level, then go into the assignment, assign the students, and then you can see the live status of these students. Okay, and then you launch Read Ready. Students see it as a regular assignment. They go in, they started, do a practice task, and then they have 6 subtests. The first one tests the decoding and word recognition. It asks students whether this is a real word or not a real word. So this one is. The second subtest, and I'm going to show 1 question per subtest, test the vocabulary based on synonyms and semantic relationships, for example, forest to tree. The third subtest tests morphology, where the students understand how suffixes and prefixes change the meaning of the word in the context of a sentence. The fourth subtest tests sentence processing, the discourse cues that John was talking about. So in this case, it's 10 miles is a longer distance than 3 miles. So this tests how clauses in a sentence are combined and how things in the sentence are related. The fifth subtest builds on a story, showing 1 sentence at a time and asking the student to complete the sentence. And then it measures the reading fluency. And finally, the 6th subtest measures the standard traditional reading comprehension. And then as a teacher, you can access the reports. You can see your class and the red, yellow, and green for suggested RTI tier assignments. You can go in and see the results for individual students per skill with the per skill tier assignments, and see the recommendations that you can implement in your classroom with or without Capti. to focus on a specific skill. So the assessment helps you identify why students are struggling, and then you can really focus your instruction to personalize it on, with the full knowledge of the weakest and the strongest skills that students have. And then Capti provides accommodations and helps you build these skills. John was talking about using text-to-speech, to model fluent readers. So in Capti, you can just press play and listen to the text being narrated to you. So it reads and highlights each word as it reads. It uses Alexa quality voices, so it's very natural sounding. And this is where you can work with any curriculum. In contrast to other products that help develop skills, Capti works with your curriculum. You can add any content from a variety of different sources, including Bookshare, Gutenberg Books, using Google Classroom, Microsoft. It's all here. Your files from your computer. So I'm going to go to Google Classroom and the Google Drive, and I'll pick, for example, a PDF file. You could also use images, about 15 different file formats. And this, again, is your curriculum. Or you let students choose what they want to read. So it's currently loading. And then here it is. And this is where you have all of the active reading and reference tools available to you. To give you an example, you can look up a translation for each word. For example, I do stood, translate. So this is your vocabulary building. And it's intelligent to know that this is a past tense of the word stand. And you can do this in 100 different languages and build a word list, add annotations, access the words that you are learning. So it's very powerful. And of course, it's accessible. You can customize it with open dyslexic font, different contrasts, masking, line spacing, and so on. And you can also use it just in the browser on any web page by selecting any text and pressing play. And reading accessibly. All right, I'm going to stop here and come back to the presentation. So in case you were wondering, so this was the demo. Capti is well integrated with Google Classroom, Schoology, Bookshare, Canvas, Blackboard, Clever. Is it being used? Yes, all over the country. These are just some of our K-12 partners. Is it being used in higher education? Yes, again, all over the US. Here, just some of the university using it. Has it been recognized? Yeah, it received numerous grant awards from Department of Education, National Science Foundation, NIH, Department of Health and Human Services, and FCC, EdTech Digest, and so on. Does it work? Well, Cherry Creek School District recently came out with a case study on Capti. Within a year, their mid to moderate special ed students saw their reading comprehension jump 2 to 3 grade levels after using Capti for just 72 hours. That's 15 minutes per school day. And Yale's also showed major growth. Teachers were able to identify deficiencies in reading skills and focus on targeted interventions. Students were able to independently access social studies, science, math, and reading curriculums. And interestingly, they started describing themselves as readers. You can read more about the case study at captivoice.com/Capti case study. But find out for yourself. Apply for the micro grant for a chance to win an 18-month subscription to Capti Voice and Read Ready. Apply by Valentine's Day and we'll show you our love. You'll get the VIP treatment and we'll help you replicate success with your students. I'm guessing you'll wait until the last day to submit. I certainly would. But really, it takes only 5 to 10 minutes to apply. So just open it in your browser right now. Type in captivoice.com/grant2020 and click apply. And feel free to share with your supervisors, your colleagues, and post about it on social media. So thank you for attending. And this is where we're going to come back to answering questions. All right, John, many people do not want to hear the science, just the solution. How do you help the educators open their minds to learn the brain science to help inform their teaching?
If you're successful, if you're applying these kinds of lessons, if your students are learning, you don't need the science on top of it. We need to do the science because not everybody is learning, because we need to know not only what works but what doesn't, and we need to be able to sort of create compelling reasons and evidence for better practices. So not every teacher needs to know every piece of science. I always use the analogy, you don't need to know physics to throw a curveball. But I think, any professional in any professional career keeps up with the changes, keeps up with the latest knowledge. And so whether you're getting the latest, and you have to be able to evaluate that knowledge. That was a major lesson about the internet these days. Everybody is telling you that everything they do is evidence-based, is going to work, and does everything all the time. So how do you decide which is which? Well, you need you need to develop your own knowledge to be able to make those judgments. One way is, does it work? Another way is, have others been able to make it work? Another is to sort of draw some of those implications from the science yourself. So that's what I'd like to express.
Okay. Here's another question. How does students' reading of connected text every day support reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension?
Well, on the sort of back end of the system, there has to be what I like to call a learning algorithm that is basically doing the phonological recoding of the language at the word level and is creating really sensible computational chunks of that. So again, your brain's just this computational network, and it'll see ing and it'll chunk it. It'll see kn and it'll go to n. And the thing about this system is it will keep learning if you set it up with the right sort of baseline things to look for. And it will adapt itself statistically to the patterns in the language. So the reading fluency to me is at the one side is basically evidence that this underlying system is working well. On the other side, again, oral reading fluency is speech, and you're imposing expression, intonation, which means you're using your language system. You want the written word to turn into language as quickly in the process as possible, and therefore it will take advantage of all the language skills you have. So that's the way it helps to promote comprehension, vocabulary. We have to hear there are exception cases. If you come from another country and there's very little history of the language, the second language being spoken, and you have very, very strong print skills, you can problem solve your way through English without being very good at saying it aloud. But that is the exception case. Second language learners with a lot of first language knowledge and a lot of print skills. For almost all other learners, I think hearing the language, understanding how it flows, understanding its prosody, and therefore producing it is conditioning the entire brain to be good at reading and making sense of it in real time.
Okay, thank you. And Elizabeth is asking, my high school students read at 3rd and 6th grade level. Should I include phonics in my instruction?
Yes, but not the grade not the same grade 1, 2 phonics, or 3. I mean, they really need to, and I'm not an expert at it. There are a lot of programs for high schoolers that are out there. But again, the more they can play with that language, the more the phonology, playing with the morphology. Again, do this in spoken forms. Have them, both reading aloud, have them mirror reading, have them listening. But yes, somehow you have to make sure their attention is being spread across. The problem with one might find with a high school reader who's reading at such a low level is that they essentially look at a word and guess based on part of it. They're not really trying to read the entire word as a whole bunch of letters and a whole bunch of sound patterns. And somehow, and I don't know, I don't think anybody's got the magic bullet for this, you need to sort of break that bad habit and have them refocus on the parts of that word. And a lot of wordplay and a lot of games might help with that. Reading aloud. Again, I can't sort of off the top of my head give you all the good instruction techniques that might do it. The principle is find out whether they're actually able to sound out a word continuously from beginning to end, or whether they're skipping around and skipping pieces of it. If they are, then you need to get a program somehow that gets them refocused back on the parts of the word. By the way, a lot of times specific reading disabilities are missed in the history. So get a clinical specialist to look at that as well. It may be an underlying difficulty that will not be easy to remediate, and it's best to put the best science and the best help into that clinical process.
Okay, and segueing into students with disabilities, Mary's asking, what would you say are the main differences between a student with a language impairment and a student with a learning disability who has reading difficulties?
Wow. You should take a course on that because it's a nuanced answer. My understanding is that a language-based impairment nearly always shows up as a break in that orthographic to phonological functional network. It often shows up as difficulties with phonemic awareness, that is, the analyzing or parsing the sound structure of the language, which now interferes with this development of automaticity. So in some languages where it's very transparent between the spelling system and the writing system, in the language system, which English is not, the symptoms of a specific reading disability are just slow reading. Because they can sound everything out and it's pretty consistent, but they still end up being impaired in speed. Learning disabilities are everything else. They could be problem-solving issues, they could be sequencing issues. There's a lot of different potential subtypes of those. My judgment would be that those may interfere with the learning process itself. So if you have an attention disorder, you're not paying attention to what you're learning. If you have a other kind of complex processing problem, it could interfere. So the biggest distinction has to do with the focus point of the difficulties you have with learning. But please, go to the textbooks, go to the experts on it to really develop your knowledge in that area beyond just listening to me tell you what I remember and know.
Okay, maybe one more question. Jen is asking, how do you sell reading intervention to those students who have had intervention for years and apparently without success?
I kind of want to aim them at tools. I think I'm obligated not to plug your tool for Capti, but let them be able to listen to continuous text. Let them be able to read aloud with it on a technology in private. Aim for interventions that sort of background the antipathy, the sort of lack of motivation, the sort of avoidance behaviors, because it's sensible. I mean, if you do something poorly and it's been public for a long time, you don't want to do it. And somehow you have to reverse the sort of psychology of that. I've actually talked to colleagues about, they think of some learning environments as being traumatic. And so you basically almost have to treat learners as if they've suffered certain kinds of traumas in their life from the negative impact of failure to learn over and over. So I think that's the pathway. I don't know the specifics, depends on the program. And it's why I kept emphasizing this idea of play. Again, the idea of using the technologies in place of people, when that helps them to feel empowered, they can be critical of the technologies. They can spend as much time as they want with it. The technologies are not judging them. So that's the sort of starting point for it. Because after all, as I still believe very strongly what I said, which is they have to view themselves as readers. They have to view themselves as willing to practice without it being a painful experience. It does get easier over time when you practice. Most of us have that experience. They have to have their faith restored in that learning process.
Wow. All right. Well, there's one more question that probably is more appropriate for me. Is the Capti program available for home use? My dyslexic, dysgraphic child is being failed by our school district. It is 4 to 5 years away from serving students with language-based disabilities. That is, of course, sad to hear. There's a lot of districts like that out there, but a lot are adopting the novel technologies that help students improve. Now, speaking about Capti, it can be used at home or at school. If a district provides it, they're paying for it, they're supporting it, and they have the access to teachers' tools, analytics, and the assessment. If you're purchasing Capti as a consumer, so to say, as an individual user, then you can definitely use it alone. You just don't have access to the assessment and analytic tools. Let me go through the closing slides, and then there'll be contact information so you can send your remaining questions to John or to me. So join the free online community for this ED webinar. As a member, you'll get all of the resources, view and share the recording, take the CE quiz, download the slides and chat log, join discussions, get invitations to the upcoming webinars. So join the community at edweb.net/literacy. And here is the final slide with the contact information for me and John. Feel free to shoot the questions. We'll take the time to answer them.
Yeah. Thank you, Yevgen, and thank you all for participating.